Marta never imagined she could hear voices while unconscious. On that cold hospital dawn, connected to machines, breathing through tubes, and with her body surrendered to a coma, something unexplainable began to happen. Although her eyes were closed and her body motionless, Marta could feel, yes, feel, something beyond the visible. A whisper pierced through the silence of the ICU. It wasn't the sound of doctors, nor the noise of equipment. It was different. It was as if a heavenly choir were reciting ancient words, bathed in light, reaching places even medicine could not. Doctors classified her as being in critical condition. Science said she was unconscious without awareness, but Marta's soul knew. Life was still moving all around her. And in the midst of that silent battle between life and death, she heard. Not a request, not a diagnosis. She heard a psalm she didn't yet know, but one that would forever change her destiny. Maybe you think that's impossible. Maybe you doubt that something so supernatural could touch a hospital bed, especially in a time of such disbelief. But what you're about to hear is not a made-up story. It's a living testimony that there are words hidden in the Bible, ancient psalms, almost forgotten, that are like secret codes that open cracks in the heavens, codes that summon angels to fight invisible battles, codes that make the impossible happen when the world has already declared the end. And the most impressive part, one of those codes was being recited over Marta's sleeping body. By whom? By angels. Yes, angels. But for you to understand how this is possible and which powerful psalm moved heaven into that hospital room, you need to listen to this story until the end. Because who knows, maybe that same psalm is waiting to be spoken over your life, over the life of someone you love, or even over that silent battle you no longer know how to fight. Before we continue, I have a special invitation for you. Write in the comments your name or the name of someone you carry in your heart. Also share, if you want, a story of faith, a memory of overcoming, or a prayer request. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This way, you help us spread these seeds of hope to those who need it most. Let's form together a living chain of prayer, where each name is a light, each comment an act of faith, and each gesture an invisible breath of healing. Now take a deep breath, because what you're about to discover from now on may change the way you see the silence of God, the presence of angels, and the power that lies hidden in a single psalm. But to understand what Marta experienced on that mysterious night, we need to go back to the moment when everything seemed lost. Before reaching that supernatural dawn, Marta had endured months of silent struggle. It began with a strange cough. Then came the sudden fevers, the unexplained weakness, consultations, tests, medications, and no definitive answers. The closest diagnosis was a severe infection, worsened by an autoimmune response that brought her defenses crashing down. Emergency hospitalization, ICU, isolation, and finally, the induced coma to try to save what remained of her strength. While her body seemed to be giving in, Marta's soul did not surrender. Inside the haze of sedatives, she experienced something no monitor could detect. Marta saw herself at times floating through gray vastness, at others walking down empty hospital corridors, searching for something she could not name. It was as if she were suspended between two worlds, the world of fading matter and the world of a spirit refusing to let go. It wasn't fear that moved her. It was an inexplicable longing, a calling from a place she could not see, but could feel. At times, flashes from her childhood would appear, her grandmother kneeling in prayer, the soft voice reading psalms before sleep. Other times, the memory of the church choir would rise again, singing promises Marta had long forgotten. In the cold hospital bed, it was as if her soul cried out, without words, for those forgotten promises to be recovered. And then the whispers came. At first, she thought they were hallucinations, but there was something different. They were voices, gentle, firm, full of tenderness. Voices that didn't speak in human language but chanted phrases, verses, prayers, like an eternal melody whispered directly into the spirit. Marta couldn't respond. She couldn't open her eyes. But something inside her was crying. Something was listening. Something was holding on to each floating word in the air. The strangest part was the sense of safety. Even without being able to move, Marta no longer felt afraid. It was as if invisible arms had been stretched over her. As if the ICU room itself had become sacred territory, protected by a presence the doctors could not see, but that Marta's soul instantly recognized. And among all those whispers, one word kept repeating. A word she didn't immediately understand but would later discover to be the key to the miracle waiting for her. It was the name of a psalm. A psalm that would not yet be revealed, but that was already beginning to sow hope within her. And if you've ever felt, even without understanding, that some invisible force protected you on your hardest days, then know this: what happened to Marta might in some way be happening to you too. On the following dawn, something extraordinary happened. In the midst of the coma, Marta felt as if she was lifted from the bed, not with her body, but with her soul. The ICU room disappeared. She found herself in a vast golden field lit by a soft light with no source. It seemed to emerge from the very air. There was no sound of machines, no scent of medicine, no urgency. Just peace. A peace Marta had never experienced in her entire life. That's when she saw them. Angels. Not like in paintings or books, but like radiant presences shaped in purity and light. They didn't speak with words. Their mouths didn't move. But from them flowed a living song, a vibration that turned into sacred phrases, verses, prayers. Marta didn't understand how, but she recognized each line, as if they were ancient, memories being awakened inside her. And the most powerful part, they were reciting a psalm, a forgotten text, lost in the pages of the Bible that few today still know. But in that moment, it was being spoken with a solemnity that made the very air vibrate. Marta wanted to ask. She wanted to understand. But her mouth would not open. Still, inside she knew. That prayer was being stitched into her, verse by verse, like a spiritual armor. It was as if heaven was engraving promises directly into her wounds. She tried to memorize the words, but it was all too much. Each phrase seemed to touch a sleeping part of her soul. Each verse seemed to erase a shadow of fear. Each whisper seemed to plant a seed of new life within her. Then, one of the figures of light came closer. It had no face, just a sweet, strong, unmistakable presence. And with a gesture, it placed an invisible hand over Marta's chest. She didn't hear words. She felt them. She felt she had not been forgotten. She felt her tears had not been ignored. She felt that God had sent help, not in her time, but in heaven's time. And it was in that moment she understood. There was a hidden psalm, a living psalm, being recited in her honor. A psalm that didn't just ask for protection, but guaranteed presence. That didn't only plead for deliverance, but for company within the pain. Still unconscious, still trapped in the coma, Marta smiled for the first time in months. She didn't know the name of that psalm, not yet, but the miracle had already begun. And if, in the silence of your suffering, there are angels reciting promises you still cannot hear, maybe today you're more surrounded than you think. While Marta remained in the coma, the doctors continued their daily rounds. To them, she was just another unconscious patient, connected to monitors that measured heartbeats, breathing, minimal reflexes. But what clinical eyes couldn't see was that a silent war was being fought inside that seemingly motionless body, a war between life and surrender, between hope and abandonment. Outside, her family prayed. Some prayers were full of confidence, others drenched in despair. Faith, for many, felt like it was slipping through their fingers like sand. Friends took turns in the waiting room, bringing flowers, letters, recorded songs. But deep down, the feeling was the same. Marta was too far gone, trapped in a place where no one could reach her. They didn't know. They didn't know that every dawn when the ICU sank into its frozen silence, Marta was visited again. Not in random dreams, but in experiences so real they defied all human logic. She returned to that golden field many times. Each time, The angels recited new stanzas. Each time, the psalm gained a new layer of meaning. It was as if heaven itself was singing over her, not songs of sorrow, but hymns of anticipated victory. Promises that floated through the air, promises that mended invisible cracks in her soul. Marta, in her state between life and death, began to notice something extraordinary. The more she connected to that psalm, the stronger she felt inside, as if deep roots were being planted within her spirit, as if her essence was being rebuilt, brick by brick, not with human medicine, but with eternal words. It felt like a treatment, but not for the body, for the soul. She understood, even while unconscious, that those angels were not there to take her away. They were there to guard her, to prepare her, to restore her, not to carry her off, but to return her to life, stronger, steadier, more full of purpose than before. And in that untouchable atmosphere, a truth was anchored deep in Marta's heart. God sends angels to his wounded children. God still speaks through living psalms. And sometimes the greatest healing doesn't happen when you wake up, but while you still dream. And what if, while you're fighting to survive, heavenly armies are fighting for you in dimensions your eyes cannot see? Maybe the miracle is already being sung around you. No one could explain what happened that morning. Marta's heartbeats, which had remained slow and fragile for weeks, began to gain strength. The heart monitor, once erratic, stabilized like a melody finally finding its rhythm. The doctors, skeptics by nature, scribbled in their charts, sudden improvement, but no one could truly explain it. What science couldn't see, Marta felt. She awoke with a serenity that bordered on the supernatural. It wasn't a jolt, there was no shock. It was like slowly rising from a deep ocean, breathing in air that was new, clean, gentle. As she opened her eyes, the first thing she felt was a presence. Not a human one. The presence of the one who had been with her in the golden field. The presence of the angels. The presence of the God who sings living psalms over his sleeping children. The doctors surrounded her, stunned. Tests were run, scans repeated. Everything seemed like a mystery, but Marta knew. She knew her body had responded not just to medicine, but to something infinitely greater. To words recited in the invisible, words that reignited life where hope had nearly gone out. Her first sentence, voice still hoarse, was whispered to a nurse. "They sang to me." The woman didn't understand, but smiled, moved, without knowing why. In the days that followed, while her recovery astonished the medical team, Marta asked for one thing, her Bible. And there, with hands still fragile, she began to search for the psalm that still echoed in her memory. She didn't know the number, yet, didn't know the chapter, but she knew every word. She knew that psalm wasn't just any psalm. It was an ancient promise, forgotten by many, but alive in the heart of God. A psalm that summoned angels, that built invisible walls of protection. A psalm that turned hospital beds into altars of silent miracles, and Marta could feel it. Until she found that psalm again within the pages of the Bible, a part of her would still remain trapped between dream and reality. But what psalm was it? What prayer had the power to make heaven lean down to a hospital bed? Marta was about to discover, and maybe so are you. That quiet afternoon, while the metallic hum of machines filled the room, Marta held her Bible with the same reverence as someone holding a compass in the middle of a desert. Her fragile fingers moved across the pages like someone searching for a lost memory, a distant echo of something lived beyond this world. It wasn't just a textual search, it was spiritual. It was vital. She knew that within that book lay a promise her whole life had waited to find. By instinct, Marta's eyes stopped on the book of Psalms. It was as if an invisible force had drawn her there. Her hands trembled. Each turned page seemed to release a sleeping prayer into the air. And then, almost like a whispered answer hidden among the worn pages, she found it. Her eyes filled with tears as she read the opening words. "For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways." It was Psalm 91, not just the psalm of earthly protection, as she had learned in childhood, but the psalm of eternal protection. The psalm that summons angels, that lights invisible candles in dark rooms, that transforms cold beds into thrones of hope. Marta knew. This was the song she had heard. This was the breath that had pulled her out of the darkness. She couldn't finish reading without tears falling freely down her face. Each word seemed to restore a piece of what fear and illness had stolen. Psalm 91 didn't promise the absence of battles. It promised companionship in the middle of the war. It didn't say there would be no pain. It said pain would not have the final word. She held the Bible tightly against her chest and closed her eyes. Again she heard, not with her physical ears but with her soul, the soft choir of angels, repeating ancient verses like someone calming a frightened child. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. It was real. It was alive. It was present. And in that moment, Marta made a silent promise. If God fully restored her, she would tell this story to everyone who needed to hear it. She would tell them there is a psalm that not only comforts, but sends invisible armies to fight for us. But what Marta didn't know yet was that her journey wouldn't end with discovering the psalm. In fact, she was about to live the greatest testimony of her life, where the promised protection would reveal itself in an even more astonishing way. Marta woke up the next day with a different feeling in the air. It wasn't just the subtle ease of breathing or the fact that the monitors now displayed more stable numbers. It was something deeper, quieter, more unexplainable. It was as if the atmosphere of the room had changed. A gentle warmth filled the space, even though the thermometer still showed cold temperatures. She knew something invisible was at work. The doctors entered the room with their white coats and serious faces. They carried charts and test results, speaking in hushed tones, exchanging puzzled glances. Marta, still weak, noticed something different in them. For the first time, they looked confused. The patient who should have been sedated, unstable, or even at risk, now showed perfect vital signs, as if the night had reprogrammed her entire body, as if something beyond medicine had touched what science could not reach. "It's strange," one of the doctors murmured, staring at the monitor. "The previous test didn't point to this kind of recovery. It's as if something happened." Marta smiled to herself. She knew what had happened. She knew that during that night while her body slept, her prayers, and perhaps the prayers of angels, had worked in silence. With each verse whispered in a dream, with each living promise of Psalm 91 echoing in the invisible corridors between heaven and earth, something had been rebuilt inside her. The doctors, of course, searched for plausible explanations. Medication, adjustments, unexpected reactions, rare phenomena. But Marta no longer needed explanations, because when you are touched by something beyond the natural, you feel it, you know, and you don't need anyone to believe for it to be real. In the days that followed, her recovery was so fast it became the talk of the hospital halls. Nurses whispered. Neighboring patients asked quietly, "Do you believe in miracles?" And Marta, without making a fuss, just smiled, like someone who holds a precious secret in her heart, a secret only those who have walked through the valley of the shadow of death can understand. Deep down she knew the presence of angels was still there. She could feel it when she closed her eyes to rest. She sensed it in the gentle dreams that now replaced the nightmares. And she knew that as long as she recited Psalm 91, as long as she declared those words as shield and shelter, the invisible war would continue to be won on her behalf. But Marta's mission wasn't just to survive. It was to carry this message beyond the hospital walls, spreading the hope that angels still walk among us, and that Psalm 91 is the secret password to call them. The day of discharge came earlier than any optimistic prognosis. Marta, still with arms marked by needles and a weakened body, was taken to the hospital exit in a wheelchair. Every meter down that hallway felt like a silent victory, a hymn sung by the beat of her own heart. As she moved forward, her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of reverence. She knew she wasn't leaving as just a healed patient. She was leaving as a living witness of something few dare to believe. Crossing the hospital doors and feeling the wind brush her face for the first time in weeks, Marta lifted her eyes to the sky and whispered, "Thank you." No grand gestures, no dramatic vows, just a quiet, sacred pact with life. She would honor the second breath she had been granted. Days later, already home, seated in her favorite chair with the Bible open on her lap, Marta revisited Psalm 91. This time not as someone hoping for a miracle, but as someone who had lived inside one. Every verse now felt more alive. Every word pulsed like an invisible mark of everything she had endured. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. These words, which once seemed like beautiful promises, were now living proof of a love that guards, protects, and fights even in the silence of ICU nights. And there, between weathered pages and fresh memories, Marta understood her new mission: to share what she had lived. Because her miracle wasn't just for her, it was an open letter from heaven to everyone who somewhere lies on a cold bed, surrounded by machines, unaware that angels are still sent, and that there's a secret password to call them: active faith. Faith spoken aloud, faith that holds firm in the midst of the war. And maybe, the next time you find yourself in the middle of a storm, if you remember these words, and open your mouth even just to whisper Psalm 91, you'll feel it too. Angels are still sent, even today. If your heart beat differently while hearing this story, know it wasn't by chance. Maybe you, or someone you love, is currently facing a silent battle. Maybe pain, fear, or loneliness have made their home, just like they did in Marta's life. But just as she discovered, you need to know, God still sends his angels, and they're not sent by despair. They are called by faith, even if it's the smallest seed of faith in the middle of the darkest night. Psalm 91 isn't just a beautiful Bible passage. It's an invisible summons for heaven to move. It's the secret password that activates ancient promises, meant for days of war, for dark valleys, for cold hospital rooms. When Marta, even unconscious, connected to those words, she opened a window between the visible and the invisible. And through that opening, the miracle came in. That's why now, I offer you a simple yet powerful invitation. Write in the comments your name or the name of someone you love. Share here if there is a story, a request, a pain, or even a word of gratitude. Let's form together a living chain of prayer, where each name will be like a breath that reaches the heavens, where each word will be a call for angels to descend and bring relief, healing, and protection. Also, leave your like on this video, not just as support, but as an act of faith, like someone saying, I believe angels are still sent. Subscribe to the channel, because many other stories of faith, healing, and resurrection are on the way, prepared to strengthen your soul in difficult times. Share this video with someone who needs hope. A life might be just one prayer away from transformation. And remember, in God's kingdom, nothing is small. No tear goes unnoticed. No prayer is ignored. Every act of faith, no matter how small it seems, is huge in heaven's eyes. That's how it was for Marta. It can be that way for you too. And if you thought this psalm was powerful, just wait until you hear the next hidden promise, a nearly forgotten prayer that, when spoken aloud, opens doors no one can shut. Prepare your heart. The next breath of miracle is closer than you think.